Welcome to Reform Thinking. So, what if I told you that the most famous Bible chapter about love is actually a manual for walking into a firing squad?
That is a pretty jarring way to start, but it is accurate.
It really is, like think about almost every single wedding you have ever attended.
Right, there is this heavy expectation of soft, romantic sentimentality.
Oh, absolutely. The flowers are perfectly arranged. The acoustic guitar is playing in the
The
background.
music swells up just right.
Yeah, and then someone steps up to a microphone to read 1 Corinthians chapter 13.
Love is patient, love is kind.
And we all just nod and smile, right?
We do. We assume the Apostle Paul is giving us a nice set of rules for domestic bliss.
But we are setting out on a mission for this deep dive.
A very different kind of mission today.
We want to look closely at a startling excerpt from the writings of the 18th century theologian Jonathan Edwards.
Specifically, his work titled Charity and Its Fruits.
Yes, and we are zeroing in on one single phrase from verse 7 of that chapter.
Charity beareth all things.
Right. We are going to see how Edwards takes what most of you listening read as a sweet poem and argues something completely shocking.
His thesis is staggering, really.
It is. He says that true Christian love, which he calls charity, makes a person willing to undergo all sufferings for Christ's sake in the strict line of duty.
All sufferings.
Yeah. Wait, let us stop right there and look at that claim.
It is a lot to take in.
Why is Jonathan Edwards turning a verse about being nice to people into a mandate for severe persecution and suffering?
That is the big question.
I mean, isn't that twisting the text to fit some morbid fascination with martyrdom?
It is the absolute definition of a theological shock to the system.
Right.
You read that claim, and your immediate reaction is to push back and say, well, he is overstating his case here.
Sure, because it feels extreme.
But what is fascinating here is the sheer theological precision Edwards brings to the text.
He really does.
He is not twisting the words at all. He is showing that true Christian love is not just some interpersonal nicety. Like, it is not about simply tolerating an annoying coworker.
Exactly. I mean, that is spot on. It is not about smiling when your spouse forgets to take out the trash.
Right. If we love Christ supremely, we are willing to bear the cross.
Yet if we connect this to the bigger picture of human nature, our default setting is always self-preservation.
Oh, 100%.
We want the crown of Christianity, but we have absolutely no desire for the cross that comes with it.
We want the benefits without the cost.
Yes. But Edwards is arguing that the text itself, when read with rigorous logical attention, demands an interpretation pointing to a willingness to suffer for the gospel.
He argues that if your love for God is genuine, implanted by supernatural grace, it will produce a very specific kind of spirit.
A spirit that is prepared to endure loss, pain, and even death for the sake of the King.
So the text is a description of a radical reorientation of the human heart.
Where self-interest dies and the glory of God becomes the supreme treasure.
Well, I want to invite you, the listener, to follow along as we break down Edwards' airtight step-by-step argument. It really is a masterclass in logic.
It is. We are going to see why this verse is about suffering for the gospel, rather than just putting up with a difficult neighbor.
So let us look at the exegetical argument first.
Meaning how Edwards actually reads the mechanics of Paul's words.
Right. He points out that if beareth all things means just enduring annoying people, we run into a major logical problem.
A problem with how the Apostle Paul writes.
Yeah. Edwards says there is no tautology in the text.
And we should probably define that for you listening.
Good call. Tautology is basically saying the same thing twice, using different words.
Right, like repeating yourself unnecessarily.
And Paul had already covered the idea of bearing injuries from men earlier in the very same chapter.
Just 3 verses prior, in fact.
Paul wrote that charity suffereth long and is not easily provoked.
So the argument here is that the Holy Spirit does not waste breath.
Spot on. Paul does not throw words onto a piece of parchment just to fill up space and sound poetic.
He wouldn't repeat the exact same thought 3 times in the span of 4 sentences.
The concept of avoiding tautology is crucial here.
Because Edwards views the biblical text as deliberate and precise.
Every single phrase has a distinct, calculated purpose.
If Paul already established that love suffers long with frustrating people, he would not say it again under the phrase, beareth all things.
Edwards demands that we read the text closely,
He sees a document that requires our full intellectual rigor.
while the natural mind just wants to skim familiar
Oh,
passages.
we all do that. You hear 1 Corinthians 13 so often that the words lose their weight.
They just become a blur of pleasant sounds.
But Edward stops us and forces us to look at the grammatical structure.
He points out that Paul had finished listing active good conduct toward neighbors,
Paul had just said, love rejoiceth in the truth.
which is a very active relational dynamic.
But right after that, Paul shifts to a totally different category of traits.
The verbs completely change their direction.
Right, there's a clear shift in category.
And we also have to look at Paul's consistent theme across all of his letters.
It is almost like Paul is a lawyer building a case,
I like that analogy.
starting with the daily interactions and escalating to the highest possible test of loyalty.
He starts with how you treat your friends, and he finishes with how you stand before a Roman executioner.
Wow. And Edwards looks at how Paul frequently cites suffering for Christ as the highest fruit of love everywhere else in Scripture.
Like in 2 Corinthians chapter 5.
Yeah, Paul says the love of Christ constrained him to undergo intense physical hardship.
Or in Romans chapter 5, where the love of God shed abroad in his heart is the very reason he glories in tribulations.
And in Romans chapter 8, he gives that famous list,
Right. Nothing separates us from the love of Christ.
be it famine, nakedness, sword, or peril.
So Edwards makes the case that it makes perfect logical sense.
That Paul would climax his definitive chapter on charity with that very concept.
That lawyer analogy hits the nail on the head.
Paul moves from how we act toward our neighbor to what we're willing to suffer for our God.
If we fail to see that shift, we miss the entire point of the argument.
And look at the surrounding verbs in verse 7.
The sequence says charity believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things.
That sequence signals a distinct shift away from neighbor-focused actions,
Toward a God-focused endurance.
because you do not hope all things in relation to a frustrating neighbor.
No, you hope in the promises of God when everything around you is collapsing.
And you endure all things because your faith is anchored in a sovereign creator.
Edwards points out that suffering for the cause of Christ is so frequently cited by Paul elsewhere.
It would be incredibly strange if Paul left it out of his definitive manifesto on the subject. I want you, sitting there listening, to consider how often you skim familiar passages.
We all do it without catching the escalating weight of the verbs.
We nod along to beareth all things.
And we just assume it means biting our tongue when someone cuts us off in traffic.
We domesticate the text. We make it safe.
But Edwards moves us from doing to suffering.
And here's where the discussion takes a very sharp turn.
Edwards distinguishes between true Christians and hypocrites by looking at this concept of a suffering spirit.
He points out that hypocrites, much like the Pharisees in the New Testament, will gladly engage in religious activities.
But only when it costs them nothing.
Or better yet, when it actually advances their own interests.
They might pray loudly on the street corners.
Or give large sums to charity, or attend church every Sunday.
But they completely lack a suffering spirit.
True believers, on the other hand, follow the mandate of Luke chapter 14, verse 27.
Where Jesus says, "Whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple."
But I have to ask you this.
Sure.
It is very easy for us to sit back and label the Pharisees as hypocrites.
Oh, definitely.
But isn't there a bit of this fair-weather religion in all of us?
That is a very fair point to bring up.
I mean, we all flinch from pain. None of us wake up asking to be persecuted.
No one in their right mind does.
So how do we distinguish between a normal, human biological aversion to pain and outright spiritual hypocrisy?
That is a vital question, because our natural instinct is always to protect ourselves.
You do not have to teach a child to pull their hand away from a hot stove.
It is wired into our biology.
So if we look at this through the lens of human nature, we have to admit something.
That the natural man is entirely driven by self-interest.
The core of our fallen state is that we are the center of our own universe.
Every action, even the ones that look moral or altruistic, is calculated on some level to benefit the self.
A person might give to a charity to get a tax write-off,
Or to receive praise from their peers.
or just to alleviate their own feelings of guilt.
Hypocrites will close with Christ only to work out an advantage for themselves.
They look at Jesus and they see an insurance policy.
They want the social standing of being a good, moral person.
They want the clear conscience.
And they certainly want the promise of heaven when they die.
But they have absolutely no intention of losing anything in the bargain.
They lack a suffering spirit because their religion is purely transactional.
So they are essentially trying to hire Jesus to make their lives better,
That is a brilliant way to put it. They are hiring him.
rather than surrendering their lives to him as Lord.
And the moment the job gets dangerous, they break the contract.
Wow.
But true faith operates on a completely different frequency.
The presence of a spirit willing to suffer loss for Christ is evidence of supernatural grace.
It is not something you can manufacture by just trying harder.
It is a completely new disposition implanted by God.
A genuine believer still feels physical pain, of course.
They still have a natural human aversion to suffering. They still flinch.
But underneath that human flinching is a supernatural resolve.
They are willing to follow the conditions Christ laid out from the very beginning.
They understand that following him means taking up an instrument of execution.
Which is what the cross actually was.
The hypocrite will abandon the faith the moment it threatens their bank account,
Or their career, or their social reputation.
because their own comfort was always their true God.
A true believer might tremble at the sight of the cross, but they will still pick it up.
So if true faith requires a willingness to suffer, what is the extent of that call?
Are we talking about minor inconveniences, or are we talking about total devastation?
Edwards breaks this down into two massive categories.
All kinds of suffering and all degrees of suffering.
Let us look at all kinds first.
He says we must be willing to lose our good name,
He references 2 Corinthians chapter 12 for that.
where Paul talks about taking pleasure in reproaches,
Then Edwards says we must be willing to face outright hatred from men.
citing Matthew chapter 10, where Jesus says, "Ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake,"
He moves on to the loss of outward possessions.
pointing to Paul in Philippians chapter 3.
Who counted all his worldly gains as dung so that he might win Christ.
We have to be willing to lose our ease and our physical comfort,
We have to be willing to endure severe physical pain.
as seen in the heroes of faith in Hebrews chapter 11,
And finally, we must be willing to face death itself.
referencing Matthew 10, verse 39.
He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it.
Notice how comprehensive that list is.
Edwards leaves absolutely no stone unturned.
When he talks about the loss of a good name, we really have to pause.
We have to realize how devastating that is to the human ego.
For many people, their reputation is their most prized possession.
You spend your entire life building a resume,
Cultivating a respectable image in your community.
earning the admiration of your peers,
To have that stripped away, to be slandered.
to be viewed as foolish or evil because of your allegiance to Christ.
It is a psychological torment that many people simply cannot stomach.
They would rather compromise their convictions than face the scorn of the cultural elite.
But Edwards says true charity is willing to bear even the total destruction of one's reputation,
And then Edwards moves to the second category.
which is all degrees of suffering.
It is not just about the type of suffering, it is about the intensity.
He says we must be like pure gold in the hottest possible furnace,
He says we must be willing to forsake all our closest relatives.
referencing Jesus' hard words in Luke 14 about hating your father and mother.
We must be willing to face cruel mockings.
Or, as Hebrews 11 says, to be sawn asunder.
Now, when I read this, I immediately think about our modern culture.
We value boundaries today.
We value self-care above almost everything else.
We are told constantly to protect our peace,
To cut toxic people out of our lives.
and to prioritize our mental and emotional comfort.
Giving up your good name, or being entirely willing to be hated by everyone.
It seems completely contrary to modern wisdom.
Edwards is telling us to walk into the fire.
While every voice in our culture is telling us to buy a fire extinguisher and run away.
Modern self-preservation and the radical self-giving required by the gospel are locked in total opposition.
They really are at war with one another.
Our culture tells you that your highest good is your own comfort.
Your own unblemished reputation and your own physical and emotional safety.
It elevates the self to the position of a deity.
But the gospel declares that your highest good is the glory of God,
Edwards uses the imagery of gold being purified in a furnace.
which is a classic biblical metaphor.
In metallurgy, when you heat gold, you are not doing it to destroy the precious metal.
The heat causes the impurities, the dross, to rise to the surface so it can be skimmed off.
The fire proves the genuineness of the metal.
We are called to endure the fiercest heat,
Not because suffering is inherently good in and of itself,
but because suffering proves where our true treasure lies,
when a believer is willing to face cruel mockings,
or the loss of their estate, or the rejection of their own family for the name of Christ.
They are declaring to the invisible world and the visible world that Christ is more valuable than anything the earth can offer.
If your religion only functions properly when everyone approves of you and your bank account is full,
You possess a religion of convenience, not the religion of the New Testament.
I think we need to linger on that funness analogy a little longer.
It really changes the perspective on why bad things happen.
If the goal of the fire is to reveal the pure gold, then the fire is actually a tool in the hands of a sovereign God.
It is not just random chaos.
This leads us right into the theological proofs that Edwards lays out to establish his doctrine.
He gives 9 distinct proofs.
And instead of just listing them off, I want us to really dissect the logic behind them.
His first argument is based on the idea of unreserved surrender.
He uses a marriage analogy from Hosea chapter 2.
When we come to Christ, we give ourselves wholly and exclusively.
Making what Edwards calls reserves, which are mental exceptions to what we will suffer, is acting like Ananias and Sapphira in the book of Acts.
Let us look at that story for a second.
Ananias and Sapphira sold a piece of property,
And they brought a portion of the money to the apostles,
but they secretly held back part of the proceeds for themselves.
while pretending they were giving everything.
God struck them dead for the deception.
God must be loved as the supreme good.
So let me ask you this.
What?
Is making a reserve with God like presenting him with a spiritual prenuptial agreement?
Oh, that is a great analogy.
Or are we essentially saying, I am yours, Lord, unless it costs me my reputation or my retirement fund?
The concept of a spiritual prenuptial agreement is the perfect way to understand what Edwards is warning against.
Think about what a prenuptial agreement actually communicates in a marriage.
It communicates a lack of absolute trust.
It says, I love you and I want to marry you, but I'm also anticipating a scenario where this all falls apart.
So I am going to build a fortress around my assets, just in case.
It assumes that you still have sovereign rights to your own life and your own possessions.
It assumes you can withhold certain areas of your heart from your spouse.
But genuine biblical salvation leaves absolutely no room for spiritual prenups.
When a person is brought to saving faith, they recognize the reality of 1 Corinthians 6.
They were bought with a price.
They are no longer their own property.
If you understand God as the supreme good, as the highest possible treasure in the universe,
Then holding anything back is completely illogical.
anyone who loves God as the supreme good is entirely ready to make all other lesser goods give way.
If you tell God you will follow him unless it costs you your career, you are proving with your own words that your career is your supreme good.
You have placed your job on the throne, and you are asking Jesus to sit on a footstool.
That is a devastating critique of how we often approach our faith.
We want Jesus as an advisor, not as an absolute monarch.
And that moves us to Edward's next point, which deals with what we feel.
He says we must fear God more than man.
His displeasure is far more terrible than any temporal afflictions or the wrath of men.
He points to Luke chapter 12, where Jesus speaks very clearly on this.
Be not afraid of them that kill the body, and after that have no more that they can do.
But I will forewarn you whom ye shall fear. Fear him, which after he hath killed, hath authority to cast into hell.
And he also points to Isaiah chapter 8.
Which says, to let the Lord of hosts be your fear and your dread.
We tend to fear what we can see.
We fear the boss who can fire us.
We fear the social media mob that can cancel us.
But Edwards is saying that this fear is completely misplaced if we actually understand who God is.
The psychology of fear is directly tied to what we value and what we believe has control over us.
Edwards is incredibly sharp in his psychological assessment here.
The wrath of men, as terrifying as it is, has a strict limit.
A mob can take your job, they can ruin your reputation.
And in extreme cases, they can physically kill your body.
But that is where their jurisdiction ends.
They cannot touch your soul.
They cannot dictate your eternal destiny.
The displeasure of a holy sovereign God, however, is infinitely more terrifying because his jurisdiction is eternal.
When a person is truly converted, their vision is completely reoriented.
So they fear the right things and value the right things.
If God ordains all things, if he holds the universe together by the word of his mouth,
Then fearing the opinions of mortal men is not just cowardice.
it is a functional denial of God's sovereignty.
It is acting as if men have more authority than the Creator.
And that reorientation of vision is what Edwards brings up next,
He talks about seeing the unseen.
which is the biblical definition of faith.
Faith sees the reward that vastly outweighs the current suffering.
Edwards points to 2 Corinthians chapter 4 for that.
Where Paul calls his afflictions light and says they are working an eternal weight of glory.
But the prime example Edwards uses here is Moses.
From Hebrews chapter 11.
Yes, and we really need to pause and look at Moses for a minute.
Because Moses was raised in the courts of Pharaoh.
He had access to the greatest wealth, the greatest education, and the greatest power in the ancient world.
He was absolute royalty.
He could have easily reasoned with himself, I can do a lot of good for the Hebrew slaves if I just stay in my position of power.
I will use my wealth and influence from the inside.
But instead, he chose affliction.
He chose to identify with a despised group of slaves.
Hebrews says he did this because he saw something better than the riches of Egypt.
He weighed the temporary pleasures of sin against the eternal reality of God.
And made a choice that looked like absolute insanity to the world.
Moses is the ultimate case study in calculating the true cost of things.
To the natural, unconverted mind, Moses threw his entire life away.
He traded a palace for a desert.
He traded absolute luxury for the dust of the wilderness and the constant complaining of a rebellious people.
But Hebrews tells us that Moses endured as seeing him who is invisible.
He looked past the gold of Egypt and saw the eternal reward.
He esteemed the reproach of Christ greater riches than all the treasures in Pharaoh's bank vaults.
He made the only logical calculation available to a regenerated mind.
When you actually see God for who he is, the wealth of the world looks like monopoly money.
It has no actual purchasing value in eternity.
Faith is not blind optimism.
Faith is having your eyes open to absolute reality.
Faith recognizes that the visible world is temporary and the invisible world is permanent.
So we have to calculate the cost.
That brings us to another major piece of Edwards' logic regarding discipleship.
He insists that to avoid sheer shame and disaster at the end of our lives, we must calculate what it actually requires to follow Christ before we start the march.
He brings up the parables Jesus told in Luke chapter 14.
About the builder of the tower and the king making war.
The builder who starts a tower without making sure he has enough money to finish it ends up a laughingstock.
The king who marches out to war with 10,000 men against an army of 20,000 without considering if he can win is a fool.
Edwards says you cannot take the crown without the cross.
Accepting only the easy, comfortable parts of Christianity is accepting an offer that God never actually made.
It is inventing a counterfeit religion.
And part of that calculation, Edwards says, is forsaking all.
If we refuse to suffer poverty, we haven't actually forsaken wealth for Christ.
The idea of a crossless Christianity is the great heresy of the modern age.
We have convinced ourselves that we can negotiate the terms of our own salvation.
We treat Jesus like a vendor in a marketplace, haggling over the price.
I will give you my Sunday mornings, but I keep my finances.
I will agree to your morality, but I will not endure any public mockery.
But a sovereign God does not negotiate with rebels.
He dictates the terms of surrender.
When Jesus told the crowd to count the cost, he was doing something that modern church growth experts would consider disastrous.
He was actively trying to thin the crowd.
He was telling them, if you are not willing to lose everything, do not even bother starting.
If you sign up for a religion that guarantees your comfort, you have not signed up for biblical Christianity.
You have signed up for a country club.
That brings us to what might be the most difficult and jarring proof Edwards offers.
Denying the self.
He says following Christ means literally disowning oneself, referencing Matthew chapter 16.
But the analogy Edwards uses here is incredibly severe.
It is an image that is almost shocking to modern ears.
He points back to the book of Exodus, chapter 32.
The story of the golden calf.
Moses comes down from the mountain, sees the Israelites worshiping this idol, and he draws a line in the sand.
He says, "Who is on the Lord's side?"
The tribe of Levi steps forward.
Moses then gives them a horrifying command.
He tells them to strap on their swords, go through the camp, and execute the idolaters.
Even if it is their own brother, their own companion, or their own neighbor.
Edwards uses this historical event to say we must crucify the flesh without mercy.
How on earth does Edwards expect us to apply the image of slaying our own relatives to the internal concept of denying ourselves?
It is a brutal image, and Edwards uses it deliberately because the reality of sin is brutal.
If we connect this to the biblical doctrine of the mortification of sin, the picture becomes vividly clear.
John Owen wrote extensively about this. Be killing sin, or it will be killing you.
The Levites showed absolutely no mercy to the idolaters in their own camp.
Even when those idolaters were their own flesh and blood.
They did not hesitate.
They did not try to negotiate a truce with the people bowing to the calf.
Edwards is telling you that true believers must show that exact same lack of mercy to their own internal idols and their own self-interest.
You cannot coddle your sin.
You cannot make peace with your fleshly desires.
You have to treat your own selfish ambitions, your pride, your lust, and your greed with the exact same severity the Levites showed to those who worshiped the golden calf.
So, denying yourself means you act as though you do not even own yourself.
When your desire for comfort rises up and demands to be satisfied at the expense of your obedience to Christ, you must strike it down.
You draw the sword on your own ego.
That is right. The hypocrite tries to negotiate terms of peace with their sin.
They try to manage it, keep it quiet, keep it in the basement.
The true Christian declares total war on it.
Jesus did not offer us a gospel of addition, where we keep our old lives, keep our old habits, and just add a little bit of religious comfort on top.
To make us feel better about ourselves.
He offered a gospel of crucifixion.
You put the old man to death.
When your pride demands that you defend your reputation, you slay it.
When your fear of man demands that you stay silent about the gospel, you slay it.
You take the sword to the golden calves in your own heart.
We are moving into the final stages of Edwards' massive argument now.
He talks about following the Lamb wherever he goes, as Revelation chapter 14 describes.
And to illustrate this, he uses a fascinating historical narrative from 2 Samuel chapter 15.
He brings up the story of Ittai the Gittite.
Now, let us set the scene for the listener.
King David has been betrayed by his own son, Absalom.
Absalom has stolen the hearts of the people and is marching on Jerusalem to seize the throne.
David is forced to flee the city, weeping, barefoot, heading into the wilderness.
He is a king who has just lost everything.
As David is fleeing, he sees Ittai the Gittite,
who is a foreigner, a Philistine who had recently pledged loyalty to David.
David tells Ittai to go back.
He says, "You are a foreigner. You don't need to share in my exile. Go back and work for the new king."
But Ittai refuses.
He looks at David, a king without a throne, and says, "As the Lord liveth, and as my lord the king liveth, surely in what place my lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also will thy servant be."
Edwards says Christ is the spiritual David.
Jesus warned us in Matthew chapter 8 that the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head.
It is easy to march in the parade when the king is sitting on the throne and handing out favors.
But Ittai marched out into the barren wilderness when David was fleeing for his life.
The story of Ittai is one of the most stunning examples of loyalty in the entire Old Testament.
Look at the situation logically.
Following David at that precise moment offered absolutely zero earthly advantage.
In fact, it promised hardship, starvation, and highly likely death at the hands of Absalom's massive army.
Ittai had an out.
David gave him a free pass to return to the comfort of Jerusalem.
But Ittai's allegiance was not to the throne. His allegiance was to the man sitting on it.
That is the heart of a true Christian toward Christ.
We follow him into the wilderness of rejection.
We do not follow Jesus because he promises us political influence or financial stability or cultural approval.
We follow him because he is the king, even when the culture has rejected him and crowned a usurper.
If your loyalty to Christ evaporates the moment the culture turns hostile toward him,
You were never loyal to him in the first place. You were only loyal to the benefits you thought he could provide.
Edwards then talks about overcoming the world, drawing from 1 John chapter 5.
He points out a duality that we often miss.
We must overcome the world's frowns, meaning its persecution and hostility.
But we must also overcome its flatteries, meaning its bribes and seductions.
If we bow to either one, the world conquers us.
And this leads to his final major point.
The trial of sincerity.
He points to 1 Peter and Zechariah, showing that sufferings are trials specifically designed by God to test our sincerity.
They separate the pure gold from the baser metals.
So this brings up a massive theological point about why these trials happen in the first place.
If God is completely sovereign, then these trials are not accidents.
This touches on the core of how we understand providence.
God ordains these specific trials to reveal the reality of our faith.
He uses the world's frowns to test our courage.
And he uses the world's flatteries to test our purity.
When the world offers you a promotion or a platform or immense wealth on the condition that you compromise your biblical convictions,
That is a flattery. It is a bribe.
when the world threatens to take away your livelihood, if you refuse to bow to its new moral orthodoxies,
That is a frown. It is a threat.
overcoming the world means you are completely immune to both its bribes and its threats.
And how does God prove that immunity?
By placing you in the furnace of affliction,
The fire does not create the gold, it proves the gold is real.
God places suffering in our path to expose whether we are true followers like Ittai.
Or whether we are just religious mercenaries looking for a payday.
This brings us to the sharpest point of application in Edwards' entire treatise.
He turns his gaze directly onto his audience and demands severe self-examination.
He asks them to look not at the threat of the executioner's block, but at the lesser trials God has already sent into their lives.
He mentions everyday things.
Business troubles, financial losses, the loss of goodwill from neighbors, or just general inconveniences.
He asks, do we show a spirit of self-renunciation in these minor events?
And then he quotes one of the most piercing verses in the Old Testament, Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 5.
God says to Jeremiah, if thou hast run with the footmen, and they have wearied thee, then how canst thou contend with horses?
And if in the land of peace, wherein thou trustedst, they wearied thee, then how wilt thou do in the swelling of Jordan?
Let us apply this directly to you, the listener.
Most of us listening are not currently facing the threat of being sawn asunder or thrown to the lions today.
So how should we view our daily frustrations?
A canceled flight, an unexpected car repair, a mean comment from a coworker.
How do we view those in light of this massive, towering call to martyrdom?
That question from God to Jeremiah should stop every single one of us in our tracks.
The footmen are the minor inconveniences you just mentioned.
The canceled flights, the flat tires, the workplace insults, the anonymous criticism online.
These are the small, everyday tests of our spiritual disposition.
They are the minor skirmishes.
God is asking if your faith completely crumbles, if you lose your temper, if you scream at the gate agent.
If you abandon your Christian witness the moment your daily plans are derailed.
How on earth do you think you will survive the charge of the cavalry?
If the footmen exhaust you, the horses will trample you into the dirt.
God uses the land of peace to reveal our hidden weaknesses.
If we cannot renounce our own ease when dealing with a minor financial setback,
we will never possess the fortitude to face the confiscation of our entire estate.
So the everyday frustrations are the training ground.
That is right. They are the moments where we practice saying no to our flesh and yes to the Spirit.
Every time you accept a minor injustice without seeking revenge.
Every time you bear a financial loss without accusing God of abandoning you.
You are strengthening the muscles of a suffering spirit.
If you find yourself complaining bitterly about the smallest hardships, it is a glaring red flag.
It is a clear call to examine your own heart, to repent of your entitlement.
And to beg God for the grace to develop a true suffering spirit.
Because the swelling of the Jordan, the floodwaters of genuine, severe testing, will eventually come.
Edwards does not leave us in the furnace, though.
He closes his work with a beautiful, soaring exhortation based on the rewards of suffering.
He points to the happiness of the persecuted.
Quoting Jesus in Matthew 5 and Luke 6, saying, "Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, for great is your reward in heaven."
He talks about the glorious rewards promised to those who endure.
The hundredfold return, the crown of life.
And the very specific, intimate promises given to the overcomers in Revelation chapters 2 and 3.
Christ promises them the tree of life, the hidden manna,
A white stone with a new name written on it, white raiment.
and being made a permanent pillar in the temple of God.
Finally, Edwards points to the great cloud of witnesses.
He calls the roll of those who have gone before us.
The psalmist who faced enemies on every side.
Jeremiah in the miry dungeon.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walking into Nebuchadnezzar's blazing furnace.
Daniel thrown into the lion's den.
And finally, looking to Jesus himself, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame.
The promises in Revelation are not abstract metaphors.
They are directly tied to the reality of what you will face tomorrow.
The reward for enduring the furnace is not just a change in your circumstances.
It is full, unhindered, eternal union with Christ himself.
When Christ promises the hidden manna, he is promising spiritual sustenance that the world cannot see and cannot take away.
When he promises the morning star, he is promising himself to those who prove their love by bearing their cross.
The cloud of witnesses Edwards lists are not superhuman demigods.
They were men made of the exact same dust we are.
They had the same fears, the same aversion to pain.
But they endured because they saw the invisible God.
They ran with the horses, and they crossed the swelling of the Jordan because the grace of God sustained them.
To summarize the massive paradigm shift Edwards offers us in this text,
Charity isn't just a polite smile or a soft, sentimental feeling.
It is the invincible armor that allows a believer to face the furnace, the sword, and the absolute loss of all things for the sake of the King.
It is a supernatural love that looks at the cross, counts the heavy cost, and says, he is worthy of it all.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to ponder as you step back out into your daily routine.
It's something that builds on everything we have discussed today.
If the furnace of suffering is the very thing God uses to prove the pure gold of our faith,
What does it mean if our lives are entirely comfortable, completely free from any friction with the world?
if you never face opposition, if the world never frowns at you,
Is that a sign of God's blessing, or is it a glaring warning sign that you have secretly accepted the world's terms of peace?
keep thinking, and we will see you on the next deep dive.